Hey, we're trying to figure out all kinds of things today, like what's the difference between an Anglican and an Episcopalian, and what is the Church of England and what is it not, and how does all of that fit together? Who's what to which, right? So, we're going to dive into some more dialogue and conversation for our This Week in Christian History. And once again, we are very thrilled to have as our guest Kaylena Radcliff, who is the managing editor of Christian History Magazine, to give us a little heads up about upcoming issues of the magazine and what content is going to look like for that. And this one, it's on Anglicans, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be here. So,
Thanks.
our upcoming issue, and we're looking at releasing this one in August. It should be the print publication should be available in August. But we are tentatively titling this issue "Meet the Anglicans." So, we're going to look at the history of Anglicanism, and I say Anglicanism as opposed to uh, the Anglican Church because actually, what I've learned as we've dived into is that to say the Anglican Church is kind of not the right term because there's all kinds of Anglicans,
Mm,
and so this is the story, the thread that we're following. So we're going to start in England because that's where Anglicanism starts, right? The Church of England, but it actually starts before the English Reformation, and we will talk about how Christianity came to England, and that happened by the third century. You have the Christianization of the British Isles, yeah, and then how that spread, and it's a very interesting story. And then we move into the Protestant Reformation, which
mhm.
really, in England, it looks very different than the rest of the Protestant Reformation because of the way that Henry VIII handled the sort of political and theological trajectory of the church and becomes the supreme head of the Church of England. And so and then after he dies and his children starts, taking over and
Right.
shaping the church differently, that's also a very interesting story. But what you end up with is with Elizabeth, who is the longest reigning monarch, preserves the church that Henry was trying to make. And that's why it looks different because we didn't have the continued Reformation of Edward, nor did we have the reversal all the way back to Catholicism that Mary was trying to do. And
Hmm.
so this is where the church comes from. And then we move into well, the 17th century religious wars that took place between this is also like another political kind of theological event, right? So it's
Sure.
not just Puritans versus the Church of England. There's a whole lot more that goes on to that story, but you have your dissenters from the Church of England leaving England and coming to the United States, and you
Hmm.
also have, how dissenters interacted with the Church of England when they were in power, when they weren't, and how that story is shaped as well. And I am going to kind of move forward because it's part of the story. But one other thing that you learn too is that Anglicans are among the first settlers of the United States, where,
Yeah.
we're always thinking like, oh, it's the Puritans up in New England.
Right. We're
But
thinking
we're
pilgrims, right?
thinking
We're putting it
pilgrims,
right. We're thinking Thanksgiving, right?
but this is different from, the settlers at Jamestown. They were Anglicans. And
Mhm.
so we see that that's actually one of the earliest, traditions from the West that are coming from Christianity. So that story is developing, and this issue will also explain how in America it's not it became the Episcopal Church, and part of that is because during the Revolution they couldn't be a church organized under the Archbishop of Canterbury in England because they were no longer pledging their allegiance to the King of England. So they
Right.
had to organize differently after that. Um, a lot of other interesting stories. So we look at, the Episcopal Church and that story and kind of some of the splits that come down later due to different,
Hmm.
theological issues. We also look at during was it the 18th century in England how Anglicans actually helped organize and reform social change, specifically through the slave trade. And you look at big figures like William Wilberforce and John Newton and John
Sure.
Wesley. And, John Wesley's part of the story because he was Anglican, but then, founds the Methodists, right? So those are just a kind of a few things. There's a lot going on. It's just a big issue because there's a lot of ground to cover.
Sure.
And we are going to focus primarily on the Church of England, in America, and we're going to look at it kind of briefly in internationally. So Africa and the Global South will also come into this
Okay.
story and how missions to those places, created, Anglican Church in those areas. But this, now these places are sending Anglicans, missionaries around the world, and they look a little bit different, than the Episcopal Church in America. So that's that. And then at the end of the issue, there's a couple of really cool features that I'm interested in. We have a gallery of like 20th century, 21st century Anglicans that you might know. So names that you might have heard of, like John Stott,
Hmm.
Alistair McGrath. And then we look at, closer, contemporary, N.T. Wright, Sarah Mullally, who is now the Archbishop of Canterbury. So those are kind of some of these we talk about that. And then the final thing that we have is a interview with a number of Anglicans from different Anglican communions. And so
Okay.
so that for me tells the whole story and gives me, as somebody who's not Anglican, which I think most of the people who are coming to this issue are approaching it not as Anglicans, to understand the history of the Anglican
Sure.
Church or the
Sure.
Anglicans.
No, that's fantastic. And so many of those subjects of things that you've already touched on anyway, it's like I've told my history classes on a couple of occasions, the good Lord can use all kinds of things, including Henry VIII's love life. Who knew that, I mean, that Anne Boleyn must have been something. Okay.
Yep.
I mean, so, and then that impacts so much of what you're just talking about, and how much that goes. We've done an episode on Bishop Samuel Calther. We've
Yes.
done one on the Philadelphia 11 of the first women that were ordained as priests in the Episcopal Church. I mean, and being able to go all the way back to seeing how all of that develops, and I think that's really cool that you're following. Obviously, it's enough to fill up an issue,
Hmm.
more than enough to fill up an issue, because you're going so far back to really understanding here's what the trajectory is of all of this. This is not just a kind of a one-off, if you will, denominational group that said, well, we don't like A, B, C, or Q in this mix, so we're going to cut out and go over here and do our own thing, which certainly happens throughout all of Christianity, right? But that thing sometimes doesn't grow to something longer and more
Hmm.
sustainable, certainly not over centuries of time. And but that's not the case with Anglicans, and being able to fill all that up, to be able to follow that kind of in one thread, as you
Yeah.
say, going through all that really, really is going to make that a fantastic issue. So I look forward to getting mine, to
Yeah.
be able to reading on that once we get it. That's a
And
great issue. All right. And so that comes out in August,
yes.
right? And so remind folks that if they would like to be able to get their own copy of the magazine, as well as past issues, where we go to get all of that information.
So you can operate, or we can go to christianhistoryinstitute.org is really where everything you're looking for is. And the magazine is there. You can subscribe for free. We offer our subscriptions on a donation basis, so you can get a print copy for a year for free. Um, you can also subscribe digitally and download past issues. You can also purchase past issues from the website.
Fantastic. And the magazine, for those who may not have tuned in before, we it comes out how many times a year?
Usually 4 times a year,
Yes.
quarterly.
There
Yeah.
we go.
Sometimes we do a bonus issue, which if you stay tuned, we might have one for you in 2027.
Well, that might happen. So give us a preview though about what the other issues are, what you're focusing on for the rest of the year, just as a little
Yeah.
teaser.
Yeah, we have a great lineup. So we'll be doing after the Anglicans a biographical issue on Hildegard of Bingen. Following that, we will be looking at Eastern Christianity. So Christianity along the Silk Road, which is a subject I don't know a lot about. So I'm excited to learn about it, and I hope you
Hmm.
you will be too. And then after that, we are rounding out the year with an issue on Tertullian, an early church father. And then
Right.
the bonus issue we are currently exploring is an issue centered on Christianity and the history of film. So that should be a really kind of fun issue. It's a good follow-up. We did recently an issue on Christianity and theater. So this
Hmm.
is going to focus
Right.
on film.
Isn't that great? And I mean, as just another medium to communicate, and then I'm really interested to hear about that. I
Hmm.
mean, about, at what point in time did people really start to tell those Bible stories, right? Or to be able to tell those things that, for those of us that are old enough to remember, whenever um, uh, we would see the Ten Commandments, of course, it would be on TV, right? I mean, that
Yeah.
was usually what was happening usually around Thanksgiving, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of a standard thing to do, but being able to see how it had been her, or it could be any number of things that come out that might either have, I'm asking, I guess, that has kind of a Christian-based theme to it, but may not necessarily be like, oh, here's the story of, you know, David or whatever that is a biography. We know this is about David, and we're going to tune in, and we're going to know that's what this is going to be about. Or it may just very well be that there's a Christian thematic piece of something that cuts through part of it. Is that kind of
Yeah.
right, or am I
So
way
yeah, no,
off?
no, you're not way off. So what I've gathered from talking to some of the scholar advisors that we're potentially looking at is that there's kind of these three sort of ideas and how Christianity interacts with film. So you have the way that Protestants have historically,
Hmm.
how a Protestant filmmaker might have approached it is different from a Catholic
Sure.
filmmaker. And then also you have the way that popular culture kind of shaped the way that these big stories, they were,
Oh,
you know, secular studios were making Christian films, biblical films because of the culture in which they were operating. And this looks different, back when, Ben-Hur and the
right.
Ten Commandments come out to today, the way that how do we make Christian films? What is a Christian film? And so we're going to explore that for sure.
Oh, cool.
And I think too, the other thing is looking at the enormous changes in technology just over the last 100 years from in filmmaking. It's staggering. So, and this is an issue that will be very interesting, for our particular organization because uh, Christian history started as Gateway Films Vision Video in the 70s with Ken
Mhm.
Curtis because they created the company to distribute the Cross and the Switchblade, which I maybe you remember when that or
I do.
anything
I used to
about
have a
that.
comic book. I had a comic book that was crossing the switchblade down the left. Okay.
So this was a huge deal, and that Cross and Switchblade was released in theaters. I was told stories about my family members taking their children to go see it in theaters as a sort of like evangelical film, and so
Hmm.
that's the start of the organization I work for, and Christian History Institute grew out of that. So we're motivated to talk about this story for sure.
No doubt. That'll be a fascinating issue. And it'll be interesting to see how you guys put all of that into print because it sounds like a great documentary, right? I mean, with a lot of
Hmm.
moving pictures on it, right? That would
Hmm.
be that would be able to see. Yeah. So chariot races in an AI-driven world would be altogether different than the old school way they had to pull it all together and the
Yeah.
amount of time and money and effort and building and budgets and
Yeah.
how quick you could actually turn those things around. So that's a really great perspective too. So if I'm going to tell the story of Joan of Arc, it's going to be different if I'm doing it from a Catholic perspective than I'm going to maybe do it from a Protestant
Hmm.
perspective because it's just different in the way all that, comes together. Fantastic. Kaylena, we always enjoy learning more about what is going on with our friends at the Christian History Institute. We couldn't be prouder or more grateful for the generosity that all of y'all have given us at the Center for Christian History. We're glad to be one of your podcasts available on the website there, and to be able to know so many of our scholars and our subject matter experts and guests that we have all germinated from the credibility that is your credibility through the Christian History Institute and
Hmm.
the magazine. So we always are grateful to learn more and get a little insight on what's a coming.
Oh yeah, and thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to talk about the magazine and what we're talking about and what we're doing. We recognize that it's harder to get the word out because it's niche, but we're so grateful to be able to share the history of the faith with your audience.
Fantastic. All right, so let's all remember Christian History Magazine, right? Christianhistory.org.
ChristianHistoryInstitute.org. Yes,
Institute. We'd rather put the Institute so then we get to see all the offerings of the Institute, not just the magazine, but you can find
absolutely.
the magazine that way. Right.
Yes.
So fantastic. Hey, look, for folks who want to know more about what we're doing, or those of you that might be watching this on YouTube or otherwise, hit the old subscribe button, please. We would love to be able to have you learn more about the things that we are doing, not only in our podcast, but other things that are happening through the Center for Christian History. Kaylena, thank you. Until next time.
Until next time.
Okay.